The Italian Mafia, the original outlaw empire that inspired them all.
Blood and money. That's the life, is blood and money.
With an appeal as old as time itself.
The idea of family in that life is very important. It's everything, really.
A family built on trust and secrecy.
He said it's an oath of omerta. If you violate this, if you betray your brothers, you're gonna die and you're gonna burn in hell.
Taken down by one of its own members.
I found out that the family was gonna have me taken out, that they were gonna whack me.
Now told only by the men who lived it. The story of the Italian Mafia.
They loved killing. They made Ted Bundy look like Mr. Rogers.
On this episode of Outlaw Empires. Outlaws have shaped the destiny of this country. America wouldn't be the same without the influence of these inspired renegades.
Outlaw Empires is an in-depth look at some of the most infamous criminal organizations, told from the inside out.
Sons of Anarchy creator Kurt Sutter has spent years researching and dramatizing the lives of fictional anti-heroes.
I'm not an historian or a member of law enforcement. I'm a storyteller.
Now, he digs deeper into the human condition of real men exploring their lives, motivations, and actions.
This show isn't about making a judgment call. We're not trying to decide what's good or evil. We're not justifying bad behavior.
These are the personal stories of those who have built and shaped criminal empires.
We're just hanging out here in a bar, telling wildly epic tales. But unlike most stories you hear in a bar, ours happen to all be true.
I had 6 30-round clips, which could have taken out half a Bensonhurst. I saw the Manhattan faction walk out. I'm thinking of which one I should shoot first, which was Gotti, then Della Croce, then Gene Gotti, then Tony Roach. And I'm standing there sweating because, I mean, if you got to kill these people, you got to leave the country. You know, you got to get out of there totally.
When you mention organized crime, La Cosa Nostra is sort of the first organization that comes to your mind. The interesting thing for me in hearing Dominic and Michael tell their stories is that you understand the nature of I am in the family, and therefore I have that opportunity to become, part of the family business.
I mean, you see movies like Goodfellas. Yeah, they're great, but they don't really depict what the life is really about. They're only movies.
As Dominic Montiglio grew up in Brooklyn in the 1950s, the Mafia was the only life he knew.
The Italian Mafia represented to me family because everyone in my family, my cousins, my uncles, were involved.
Dominic came of age under the wing of his uncle, Anthony Nino Gaggi. Nino was on his way to becoming a capo, or captain, in what would soon be known as the Gambino family.
We all lived in one house at that time. Me and my mother had one room in the middle floor. Nino lived in the basement. Normally, Nino was very two-sided. He either scared somebody to death, or he just loved somebody. It was a love-hate relationship.
Just a few miles away in Long Island, the Colombo crime family provided the backdrop for the childhood of Michael Franzese. His father was John Sonny Franzese, an underboss or second in command of the Colombos.
My dad was extremely high profile. He was always a major target of law enforcement, always a target of the media. So I grew up with law enforcement really around us at sometimes 24/7. He tried never to bring that into the house. He never really let it bother him. And he was a great father. So I grew up loving and idolizing my dad and hating the police.
The founders of the American Mafia were the ancestors of men like Dominic and Michael, Italian immigrants who landed here after World War I. They were known as La Cosa Nostra, Italian for this thing of ours.
The thing that makes Cosa Nostra so unique from the other outlaw empires is the very specific connection to an ethnicity. That you have to be a full-blooded Italian to become a made man, to become a full member.
In the beginning, the Mafia was an organization forged in family ties and steeped in tradition.
The life is very, very attractive. I think it's all about the prestige, the power, what comes along with the life, this brotherhood among guys.
Along with respect and honor, the Mafia also focused on profits. The empire was launched by smuggling liquor and laundering money, and the spoils were divided among 5 New York crime families. Thanks to his family ties, Dominic was already on the inside.
As a kid, from, when I was born, Paul Castellano, Carlo Gambino, and a host of other pretty famous names were very close with me. Carlo Gambino was actually like a grandfather to me. I remember Carlo used to put me on his lap and just talk to me. To me, he was just a sweet old man. Forget that he had like 1,000 people murdered.
At the time an underboss to Albert Anastasia, Gambino was a rising force in a world where the chain of command is carefully spelled out.
The hierarchy in any one of the crime families starts at the bottom with the associates. Now, the soldiers are made guys. The next step is you become a capo. Then there's the underboss, who, if the boss dies, normally takes over.
There is a position called consigliere, not the one Robert Duvall played in The Godfather. That was fictional because you got to be Italian and you don't have to be a lawyer.
In outlaw empires, the throne is never completely safe, and Gambino was plotting to take the reins from his boss, Anastasia.
Whenever there is any kind of conflict or war in the family, it's always a civil war. It's a war within one of the families. And it's normally over control or power or leadership.
I was 10. It was a very strange circumstance. I wasn't allowed out of the house. I couldn't go to school. I think what I remember about it the most is the relatives I lost. A couple of cousins were found in trunks of cars, and, you would see it on the news. It was probably the first awareness that I had that our family just wasn't really normal.
In October of 1957, the war came to a sudden and shocking end. Albert Anastasia went to a hotel for a hot shave. 2 gunmen shot him to death in a barber's chair.
After it ended, Carlo Gambino basically took over the family.
Dominic's uncle Nino, who had backed Gambino, now found himself in a position of wealth and power.
All of a sudden, Nino and the family, we went from eating pork and beans to where he had a brand new Cadillac. It was the beginning of my training period, so to speak, into the mob, because my uncle would take me all over with him.
Dominic's training was cut short when he joined the Army in 1966. By the time he returned to Brooklyn 5 years later, the Gambino family was operating in all 5 boroughs of the city. Uncle Nino had helped build them into the most powerful of the 5 families.
Carlo Gambino was the boss. Aniello Della Croce was the underboss. Nino was the captain. In the beginning, I started off as basically a soldier. As a kid, I hadn't any real plans to join the way I got involved. I didn't really understand the life enough to know that once you got in, you're in, and you're gonna have to do things you don't want to do, but you have to, because if you don't do them, they're gonna kill you.
As a young soldier in the Gambino family, Dominic was assigned to work with a notorious figure named Roy DeMeo.
Me and Roy did not get along, because he knew I knew what he was. He was a punk. I mean, he was a killer, but all killers aren't brave people. Roy would shoot you, but he had to shoot you in the back of the head.
Dominic was family, but to climb the ranks, he'd have to be willing to spill blood.
Really, the term is work. When you're called upon to do work, you do it. And that work could be putting somebody in a hospital or put a bullet in their head.
And as Dominic would find out, your target could be an enemy or a friend.
I was sitting in his kitchen, and Nino comes up to me and he says, I just got word that Vinny Mook is back in town. So we got to keep our eyes open and find this guy. And that's when I asked him, I said, you know, for what? And he told me the story about how he was with my aunt, and Vinny and his friends were hanging out, and they made a comment about my aunt. And Nino got a hammer from under his seat and went to attack them. And Vinny hit him and broke his nose. And he says, we got to kill him. I said, he broke your nose 12 years ago. Why we got to kill him? He says, you got to kill him. I said, why? I said, I know Vinny since we were in 5th grade.
Dominic was faced with a choice: kill an old friend or defy his mobbed-up uncle. What he did next would alter the course of his life.
Nino said, Roy's coming over the house. He's bringing a hand grenade, and you got to rig the hand grenade inside the car. According to Nino, I had to gain respect amongst the crew, so I had to be a killer too.
I think there's such a rich, mysterious history to the inside workings of the Italian Mafia, more so, I think, than any other outlaw organization. If you are a member and if you're a soldier, you have to make decisions that ultimately, you know, can lead to life or death. It's not violence for violence sake. It's part of the life. It's something that has to be done.
In Dominic's case, that meant rigging the car of intended victim Vinny Mook Governara, a friend from childhood, with a hand grenade.
What I was nervous about was getting in and out of the car, because it was the shift changing for the 6-2 precinct. The 6-2 was like 2 blocks down. So we worked it out where Nino was going to stay in front of the car, Roy was going to stay in back of the car, and I was going to get in the car and rig the grenade. I didn't see them, but every time police cars come by, Nino would knock on the front hood with the gun. So I know they were around. I took fish hooks and I put one around the body of the hand grenade. I hooked one into the carpet and the other one to the door that would pull the pin when he opened the door. So when I got out of the car, I broke toothpicks in all the locks except for the driver's side lock. So he had to use that door where the grenade was rigged. And it was only 3 blocks from where we lived. So we all went home, and I sat on the porch because where the car was parked was right next to my elementary school. I was gonna wait till 6 o'clock in the morning, and if I didn't hear a boom, I was gonna go unrig it because kids would be walking right by there. So I was just waiting to hear that sound. But then about 4 o'clock in the morning, we heard the boom. And I probably sat there for about 2-3 minutes, watched some fire engines go by. Eventually, I just said, well, you know, it's silly for me to sit out here. So I went upstairs, brushed my teeth, and went to bed.
In my experience, when I watch these guys, there's a level that happens when they're discussing the act. It's almost like they're able to sort of step out of it and describe it as if they're watching somebody else do it. You can see them physically and emotionally compartmentalizing it as they're telling the stories.
The next morning, we drove by, and I mean, the car was just a puddle. That's all that was left of it. But then I found out it blew Vinny out of the car, and it blew him up on the marquee of the Deluxe movie theater, and it's across the street. He was in the hospital for a while. He had a broken leg. His shoulder was broke. His face was all messed up. He was burned. So he took off and went to California. To me, we were even.
Though Vinny survived, Dominic had passed his first real test of loyalty. As a result, he expected to move up the ranks of the Gambino family.
Well, the willingness to kill in the Mafia definitely ups your stock. Now, I knew that was going to bring me into a whole nother way of life. Now you were a killer.
A year after the car bombing, boss Carlo Gambino died of a heart attack while watching a Yankees game on TV. The Empire had lost its godfather, but for Dominic, the hurt went much deeper.
I just felt like I lost my grandfather. You know, I felt like I lost a real good friend, a mentor, somebody that I really cared about. You know, I mean, he was family to me.
With the leadership of the Gambinos up for grabs, there was tension in the air.
The mob from all over was there. You couldn't read who really wanted him dead and who didn't want him dead. Because he had a lot of control over these families. With him out of the picture, that changes.
Carlo Gambino, his successor was his brother-in-law, Paul Castellano. Some guys didn't like the fact that Paul was the boss. They didn't feel he was the best qualified. They thought O'Neill Delacroix was better.
There was two factions of the Gambino family. One was in Manhattan, and one was in Brooklyn. Now, the Brooklyn side of the family was closest to Carlo. The Manhattan side of the family was the underboss, Aniello Delacroix. One of his lieutenants was John Gotti. Gotti was highly pissed off. Carlo named Paul as the new boss instead of Aniello. There was a sense that it could go down.
For 2 decades, the Gambinos had grown in power and reach. But after Don Carlo's death, the family ruptured, and Dominic was caught in the crossfire.
Nino told me to go to the Gemini Lounge and pick up a package from Roy. I went to the Gemini. He handed me a package just wrapped in newspaper, and I could tell it was a rifle. I went back to our house and told Nino, and I said, well, I got this carbine. I said, well, what's going on? He said, well, they're going to make Paul tonight, and we're going to have the Manhattan faction over. He said, there's not supposed to be any guns. He wanted me to go to the window on the top floor and stay there with the carbine. And he said, if anything happens down here tonight and you see that Manhattan faction coming out, kill them all. Because that means we're all dead downstairs anyway.
As Dominic took aim from the window, the future of the Gambino family hung in the balance.
At that point, it was just like in Vietnam. You line up from the commander, you take him first, and you go down the line. I was just right up there ready to pop him.
From 1957 to 1976, New York's most powerful organized crime empire was ruled by Carlo Gambino. He operated largely in the shadows, yet also used quiet deal-making to vastly increase the wealth and influence of his crime family.
The idea of family in that life is very important. It's everything, really. That's why they call us mob families. You know, we're not gangs, we're not groups, we're not sects, we're families.
Family unity was fractured by Carlo's death in 1976. Before dying, Carlo decreed that his brother-in-law, Paul Castellano, be the new Don of the Gambino family, bypassing a competing Manhattan underboss.
The Manhattan faction wanted Aniello Delacroix to be the boss. He was much more of a gangster than Paulie. Paulie was a businessman. He didn't have the street experience as Aniello did or any of that.
Now, on the evening of a sit-down to settle matters once and for all, Dominic Montiglio was upstairs at his Uncle Nino's house, a rifle in his hands. He was under orders from Nino to fire on Delacroix and his crew if they moved on the new boss.
I had 6 30-round clips. I had a pillow, and I had the rifle far enough inside the window where I could cover the driveway, but the muzzle wasn't sticking out. And I had all the lights off, so you couldn't see it to begin with. But I had a clear view of them because all the lights on the driveway were on. The first car that pulled up was our people. Tommy Bellotti, Paulie, Carmine the doctor. They went downstairs. 5 minutes later, the Manhattan faction pulled up. The first thing I did was identify who was who. Hannibal Croce was like 80 years old. You could tell him walking. And John Gotti with his swagger. Gene Gotti. And Tony Roach was a heroin addict, so he was always like this, walking. And then they went inside. I couldn't hear anything because it was 3 floors down. There was an air shaft in the bathroom. So every once in a while I'd go and listen in the air shaft just to see if there was voices being raised or arguments or whatever. They hated each other, but no hollering, no raising voices. And I had no mixed emotions. I didn't have any emotions at that point. If goes down bad, this is what you got to do. With a 30-round clip and a carbine at 70 feet, they weren't getting to that car. So all of a sudden, I saw the Manhattan faction walk out. I'm thinking of which one I should shoot first, which was Gotti, then Della Croce, then Gene Gotti, then Tony Roach. And I'm standing there sweating because, I mean, if you got to kill these people, you got to leave the country. You know, you got to get out of there totally. And then I heard a knock on my door, and Nino was standing there, and I said, what went down? And he said, Paulie's the new boss.
The crisis in leadership had miraculously been resolved without bloodshed, and the Brooklyn faction had prevailed. But the Gambino family had another problem. When Castellano took over, no new members had been brought into the Mafia for nearly 30 years.
They weren't bringing new guys into the family, and the expression they used for that was that the books were closed. They would only bring a guy in or make a guy when somebody got killed. Then you were allowed to do it. Other than that, all the families agreed we're not building up, and it was mainly for security reasons.
Because it is this secret society and, you know, it's steeped in such mythology, it's a much more sort of private and personal and almost spiritual experience crossing over into becoming a member.
Shortly into his reign, Paul Castellano reopened the books. By this time, Michael Franzese of the Colombo family had distinguished himself as an earner. And for him, being made the Mafia's sacred rite of passage was the ultimate honor.
I walked into a room, and it was meant to be very imposing. It was a dimly lit room. The boss was seated at the head of the table, and the underboss consigliere to his left and right, and all the captains, they were alongside of them. And I walked down the aisle, stood in front of the boss. He looked at me with a very serious look in his face, like, you know, this is it. And the ceremony began. They took a knife, cut my fingers, some blood dropped on the floor. I cupped my hands, and Andrew put a picture of a saint. It was a Catholic altar card, and he lit it aflame. He said to me, tonight, Michael Franzese, you are being born again into a new life, into La Cosa Nostra. If you violate this oath, if you betray your brothers, and you're gonna die, and you're gonna burn in hell like this saint is burning in your hands. He said, do you willingly accept this oath? I said, I do. He said, it's an oath of omerta. You never talk about what happens outside of the family. We welcome you. You are now Amiga Nostra, a friend of ours.
When you take the oath of omerta, part of that process is sharing blood. The philosophy of that was really, you know, unique and incredibly smart. It really kept them insulated. It really kept them protected in this very specific cultural bubble for generations.
The power and prestige of becoming a made man spoke for itself. Yet the honor came with a price. A cut of the profits from every piece of illegal mob business always had to be kicked up to the boss.
So let's say we have our crew, and we made $300,000. Our lieutenant takes our money and gives the capo, who would be, say, Nino, $100,000. Nino would keep maybe $25,000, Give Paulie $75,000.
For the Mafia, brotherhood had its place, but it was money and violence that kept the empire afloat. As Dominic would soon learn, when it came to either one, the mob never forgot unfinished business.
It was my wife's birthday. Everybody was happy. Champagne was being popped. The cake was out. And Roy says to Nino, guess who I just saw on the corner of 85th Street? He said, Vinnie Mook. So I said, oh, God, here we go.
By the late 70s, the Italian Mafia had sunk its criminal tentacles into everything from prostitution and narcotics to trucking and construction. But for Dominic Montiglio, there was some old business to attend to. The childhood friend who'd assaulted his uncle Nino years earlier was back in town.
Roy came over and told Nino that he'd just seen Vinnie Mook on 85th Street. Nino said, okay, come on. And we got in the hallway, and he said, let's go downstairs and load up, get some disguises on, and go take care of this so we can get back to the party. And I had like one of them hats with sunglasses and the mustache. And Nino had a mustache on and a hat. Roy wore no disguise whatsoever, because Roy didn't care. You know, he just was that crazy. And we had used Roy's car, which we very rarely would use a legitimate car, and we parked that about a block away. I took a walk across the street. I saw Vinnie. He probably had about 12 people there. I went back and told Nino about who was. There was 3 over here, there was 4 over there, there was 2 over here. And that's when he decided that it had to be shock and awe. All of a sudden, Vinnie started going to his car, and we started crossing the street. When he saw us crossing the street, he took off, because he knew something was going down. We just had to wait for him to separate himself from the pack, because the pack came after us. And I'd stand in the street and just point the gun at them and say, just get the down, and they all got down. I could see each bullet hitting him. Usually you'll drop. He didn't drop. He went over because they were shooting him in the back, so the power of the bullets was just driving him forward. Then he just fell face down. We just started running for Roy's car. By the time we got back to the car, Nino's mustache was hanging off. And we get into Roy's car, and somebody had blocked us in pretty tight, so we were back and trying to get out of space, and there's this guy behind us blowing his horn, wouldn't get off his horn. So Roy looks at Nino and just says, Nino, I'm gonna get out of the car and shoot this guy in the head. This way we can get out of the parking space real good. And he said, all he's doing is blowing his horn. He says, yeah, but he's like, that's insulting, like that. You see, Roy would do that. He would do that. So we finally got out of the space. We didn't hurt the guy with the horn. And we went over the Brooklyn Bridge. We dumped all the guns. We took the clothes that we were wearing and batched it all up, put it in the back seat. We headed into Manhattan. Went down to the Bowery, gave it all out to the bums. Went back to the birthday party like nothing happened. They didn't put the candles on the cake till we got back. And then we had the cake, we had some more, champagne, and then we opened the presents. I wouldn't have done it the way it was done, but it wasn't up to me. It was up to my uncle. And he decided to do it that way.
Once again, Dominic had proven himself loyal to Nino and the family. With the books now open, it seemed inevitable that he'd become a made man.
I was supposed to get made. What made me really angry was I saw people getting made never did any street work.
With Dominic's fate in his hands, Uncle Nino made a decision that planted the seeds of betrayal.
My uncle used to say, he said, if you keep them down, they stay more loyal to you. And which I totally disagree with. You keep them down, and that's when they get pissed off. But that was his philosophy. He kept me down.
In the Mafia, you work your way up the ranks. You don't really begin to earn and reap the rewards of the life until you were made. Especially for Dominic, I think he felt like it was his rite of passage, that he'd been born into it. Him getting passed over, I think, there was a sense of disrespect.
Yeah, when you get into the life, you kind of find your way. There's the guys that earn money for the family, and the other one is the guys that do work for the family. Thugs are the guys that are capable of committing an act of violence. The work, I mean, that's what they call in that life, the work. The guys that do work for the family are not really expected to earn money because they can't. You either have that ability or you don't. There's a lot of scheming, too, in that life. Hey, we got this guy, he thinks he's going to be made, but we'll use him for the next 20 years. Guys are not made all the time. I mean, they could be recruits forever.
Gambino family soldier Dominic Montiglio had spent years operating under his uncle Nino Gaggi's leadership, working alongside mobster Roy DeMeo.
I started to realize how crazy Roy was because, there was just more and more people disappearing. The FBI said he had the most vicious crew that they've ever ran across in the United States. They loved killing, you gotta understand that. They made Ted Bundy look like Mr. Rogers. And every one of them was a serial killer.
By now, Roy DeMeo was a made man, thanks to his earning power. But when the time came for Dominic, Uncle Nino, the man who'd brought him into the outlaw empire, refused to back him.
But when they opened the books, I was supposed to get made. Paul put me up. Nino knocked me down. Nino told me, he says, I didn't put you in this time. And I said, why? I said, there's guys being made that didn't even hurt anybody, didn't kill anybody, didn't do anything. All they do is earn money. He says, well, I want to keep you down this way because Paulie wants you to be his driver, which meant I'd have to leave Nino. Nino wanted me with him, and he knew if I got made, I could put my own crew together. So me and Nino kind of had a falling out. I just said, screw this, and packed up my family at like 4 in the morning, and we left and headed for California, where I had a friend that I could stay with.
For 3 years, Dominic laid low on the West Coast. He had no contact with Nino or anyone else. Back in New York, the Gambinos became the target of federal prosecutors looking to bring down boss Paul Castellano and the rest of the family. And after Dominic returned in 1983 to collect on a debt, he was arrested.
I got arrested for extortion by the Organized Crime Task Force. That's when the real problem started. When I was locked up, I found out that the family was going to have me taken out, that they were going to whack me. First night, a lawyer came in and said, your uncle sent me. He said, I can get you out. And I said, yeah, he can get me out today, which he could have. I would have been dead that afternoon. Oh, I was devastated. I was, because I couldn't figure it out, what the reason was.
Most of these men have made the decision to say, I'm not going to live like you've decided to live the rest of America, and we're going to live by these set of rules and earn by the standards we want to live by. And yet the irony for me is that more often than not, within these outlaw structures, there are almost more rules and more regulations than we have in society.
In the Mafia, the most important of these rules is the law of omerta, or silence. And now, after more than a decade in the life, Dominic was poised to break that rule. Doing so would sever his ties to the family forever.
I decided instead of leaving my children and my wife behind and dying for nothing, because I hadn't done nothing yet, I was going to get in touch with the feds and offer my testimony to them.
By the early 1980s, federal prosecutors had drawn a bead on the leaders of the 5 mafia families of New York, including the Gambinos. In 1983, Dominic was arrested. Facing a minimum sentence of 20 years for extortion and other crimes, he broke ranks with his mafia brothers. Knowing that it would risk his life, he violated the family's code of silence and decided to cooperate with the authorities.
So they put me in a safe house. Then I got debriefed by the ATF, the IRS, every federal agency, or the Postal Service even. The grilling went on for a year and a half. The bargain I made with the federal government was I had to admit to all the crimes I did. And then they would take my cooperation into consideration for my sentencing.
In 1984, Dominic's confession contributed to the arrests of 24 gangsters in the Gambino family on racketeering charges. Among them were boss Paul Castellano and Dominic's uncle Nino. A year later, the dons of all 5 families were indicted in the Mafia Commission trial. A new era had arrived, and a hard-nosed prosecutor named Rudy Giuliani was determined to wipe the city clean of organized crime.
This case charges more mafia bosses in one indictment than any ever before.
In the 80s, as these families started to spread out and gain more power and move into more businesses, they obviously became a bigger threat to law enforcement. So there was this desperate need by law enforcement to start bringing these guys in.
I think Giuliani really was the guy that spearheaded this for whatever political reasons he had in mind, but he started to use the racketeering law effectively. The fear of the government at some point in time trumped the fear of the boss.
For Michael Francis, the end came just 2 years after Dominic's arrest. In 1985, he was indicted on 14 counts stemming from a gasoline bootlegging scam.
I knew I'd probably have to do some jail time at some point in time, but I wasn't afraid of that. I mean, I visited my father for how many years? You survive in jail. You do your thing, you come home.
But for Michael, home would no longer be safe. While in prison, he decided to break with the Colombo family.
You know, leaving the life for me was the hardest thing that I ever did. Even though I knew the life was wrong, I felt horrible. I mean, I felt like I was betraying my dad, betraying my oath. Honestly, till today, I mean, 20 years later, I don't like the word betrayer to be put on me.
When I walked into the courtroom, I saw Nino, Paulie, all the Mayo crew. These were all people that you've been with all your life. And, you know, it's very difficult to do that. They were all staring at you. That's what they do. That's part of their thing. They stare. And then you got people in the audience going like this, you know, and stuff like that. Once you get over that, that's it. The prosecutor, he told me, he said, just tell the truth. And once I got that in my head, them staring and all their antics didn't faze me at all. And I was up on that stand a lot.
During the trial, underboss Aniello Della Croce died of lung cancer on December 2nd, 1985. 2 weeks later, Paul Castellano was shot to death outside a steakhouse in Manhattan in a hit authorities believe was ordered by Della Croce's heir apparent, John Gotti.
Police say Paul Castellano, godfather of the Gambino family, was shot as he stepped out of his black Lincoln. 3 men wearing trench coats suddenly appeared, pumped a hail of bullets into the mob boss and his driver, then calmly walked away.
I saw it coming. I didn't know it was going to happen when it happened, but I knew something was going to happen.
The bosses from the other families, they were aware of it. That goes to show you, I mean, nobody really did anything to stop it. Paul Castellano did not like John or any part of his crew. And when O'Neill died, who was kind of Gotti's protector, I think Gotti knew he had to act first.
To keep him safe from mob retaliation, Dominic lived out the years that followed in the witness protection program. And his uncle Nino, who had introduced him to the life, died in jail of a heart attack. 25 years after Dominic helped set in motion the downfall of the Gambino family, the Mafia has begun to enjoy a surprising resurgence. New members have helped it regain its status as one of the world's most powerful outlaw empires. But former insiders say that the old values of blood and family have been weakened in recent generations.
You know, I think the tradition was certainly more important to the old-timers. What an honorable life it was, what it meant to our families. Younger guys today don't feel that way.
The mob used to be about blood and money, and today it's just about the money, and I don't think that the family structure is there anymore.
The family may have changed, but for insiders like Dominic, the deeds done in the name of the family have left a haunting legacy, from which there's no escape.
After years and years and years of living this life, if you don't have the emotional skill set to keep it tucked away, you start thinking about the choices that you've made, and those demons sort of catch up to you.
I have a recurring nightmare, which I've had for quite a few years now. It's daytime. It's me walking out of Nino's apartment. He had a blue Cadillac Coupe de Ville. And when I walk out the door, the whole DeMayo crew, all of them, are underneath the car with their little heads popped out and stuff. And one of them always saying, "Dominic, come to hell with us." I've been having that dream for a long time. When I have that dream, it keeps me up. I just stay up and watch TV and smoke cigarettes. And I probably will wind up in hell with them, so what the hell? You know, it's just a prelude.